see.
All right, so I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6:01. I would entertain someone to make a motion to accept the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, someone second it, thank you. Are we walking anything on?
Maybe just an introduction of the principals who are here and
Okay.
staff who are here.
All right. You want to do that first or before or after the tour of Sudbury?
Let's do it before everyone gets up and walks away. Just 'cause
Okay.
it's faster. They can talk to them in the hallway.
All right, and then we'll also add the SBE stuff down here.
Okay, do you want any report from me? There's time.
Yes, we will do that at the very end. Okay.
So those items that you're adding to the agenda,
Yeah, so we're adding introductions at the beginning, right after we approve our agenda, and we are adding SBE, the SBE testimony that we did this morning at the end. Okay, all of those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. So would you like to do the introductions?
Sure. So I want to welcome the administrators and staff who are with us tonight, and thank you for coming out on this lovely rainy night. And I see that the new folks are willing to sit close to the board, but everyone else is way, way back there. So I will first then introduce Vicki Wells and Dan Robb as the administrative team at Neshivy, and thank you for being here. And then in the back, Rich Vigu, who is both our transportation coordinator and the Otter Valley Union High School facilities coordinator. Marcia Bruce, everybody knows, our director of special services. I can't tell who's sitting next to you.
Oh, Eric Brzezinski.
Eric, the mask, it threw me off. Eric Brzezinski, guidance counselor for OCA. Levi Strauss, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Castro.
Oh, geez, yeah. Okay, so, and Levi is one of our school psychologists, and he'll be presenting, I believe, along with Eric and Marcia. Tom Fleury, principal of OCA. Jim Avery, principal of Otter Valley. Brenda Fleming, who can't get any further back if she tried, our business manager. Peg TV, welcome for being here. And Steve Eaton, who prepared the meeting for you and also brought in water, if anybody needs any fresh water over there. Our facilities director. So thank you all for being here. We asked them to be here because it's a facilities meeting and you often have questions, plus they're very invested in what your discussion is. So thank you.
Oh, great.
Could we do a quick round of who is at the table?
Well, that's a great idea.
It's
your turn.
Okay, all right, let's see how I can do. So at the very corner over here is our tech person, Colby Case. And then we have, I want to say Eric. But okay, it is. All right. Shoot. Eric is one of our Pittsford reps, Eric Pearsons. We have Bill Mathis, who is our Goshen rep. Derek Larson, who is from Brandon. We also have Barry Varian, who is one of our at-large members. This is Jean Collins, if anybody does not know who she is. She's our superintendent. I'm Lori Bertrand, Sudbury rep. This is Mike Lufkin, he is a Brandon rep, or you're an at-large? He is an at-large rep, sorry. Becky Bertrand, who is the Whiting rep. We have Bonnie C, we know her as Bonnie C. She is from Pittsburgh. Yeah, I would have butchered it, so good thing. And Barbara Ebling, she's from Brandon. Or no, she's an at-large, you're at-large. And then in the highest esteem ever is Charlene Bryant, who is the recording secretary, so that we do not need to record anything. And then online is Natalie Steen, who is another one of our Brandon reps.
And Jeff Lawrence, the associate principal of Otter Valley, is joining right now online. And I know that Debbie Alexander from the Lothrop principal is on her way here, but she had dog duty between school and this meeting.
Right, and Greg Bernhardt is on his way as well. He is one of our at-large members. Okay, so it looks like on our agenda we are supposed to be getting a tour of Sudbury. So Tom, can I turn that over to you?
All right. Well, you know, good evening. I'm Tom Fleury, and I used to be principal when we used to have a school here, and I can attest to the fact that the roof does not leak. So, but I'd be happy to give people a walkthrough of, you know, what it has been. I'm sort of the ghost of Christmas past in terms of what it was like. And, you know, so would you like me? Do you want to do an actual physical
Yeah, I think probably for those new members who have never been, I think we have a couple who would like to see the whole
We'd be happy to show you. We'll
Dog
take-
and Pony Show. So, thank you, Tom, for that tour. I appreciate it. Does anybody have any last questions for him regarding Sudbury and the tour that they just took? Okay. All right. Communications with parents, citizens, and staff. Is there anybody here to talk to us other than that we're told to be here to talk to them? Okay. I will tell you that we did have a board Let's Talk communication in the last couple of days regarding the once a month Fridays for teacher enrichment and letting the kids go early. They were not happy about it. And they wanted to know if the board had other ideas or if the board even sanctioned that particular event. And I said, yes, we were 100% behind the superintendent. So I have not heard back from them. So I'm assuming that that answered their question. So at this time, we are here for we should be hearing a presentation from Marcia regarding trauma-informed classrooms and alternative educational settings to meet students' emotional and behavioral needs.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight, we are going to have Mr. Flory, the principal who just gave you a tour, and Levi DeCastro, one of our school psychologists, and Eric Rosinski, the guidance counselor for OCA, and myself, present to you on childhood trauma and trauma-informed education. That will lead to some tiered supports and bring us into talking about tiered supports for special ed, and then I would love to be able to sit down and talk to you. I took the tour with Tom about possibilities for Sudbury if you designated it to special education. So that gives you an idea of what will go on. So Levi opens our presentation and he comes up and starts us. And we do have a PowerPoint to share on the screen with you.
While Levi's coming up, are people who are online able to hear okay? Natalie says kind of. Nobody else said anything. Is it just because of lousy acoustics or? All right. Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, Levi.
Stand up back here, is that okay?
Yeah.
So again, my name is Levi DeCastro. I'm one of the school psychologists for Rutland Northeast. I've been with this district for about 21 years. Seen a lot of changes, and I'd like to thank the board for your continued support, and thank you for letting us be here tonight. So what we're going to talk about is childhood trauma and trauma-informed education. And yes, slide, thanks. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is what is childhood trauma. These are some definitions. A response to a negative external event or series of events which surpasses the child's ordinary coping skills. It comes in many forms and includes experiences such as maltreatment, witnessing violence, or the loss of a loved one. Trauma can challenge one's belief that the world is safe and predictable and can leave people feeling insecure or distrustful of others. And trauma can occur in any environment and is not necessarily something that students bring with them to school. In summary, trauma is an experience that can happen anywhere that makes a child feel unsafe or insecure. And so what's traumatic for one student may not be traumatic for another student. And I could spend all night talking about sort of protective factors, but one traumatic event can affect children in different ways. Some can be highly traumatized by the same event when another student isn't traumatized. We'll skip one. There it is. Yeah, there we go. Some ways that students are traumatized, again, sometimes single events like deaths of relatives or house fires, but more commonly chronic events like abuse, witnessing or being the subject of domestic violence, family health issues, the substance abuse issues that affected our community have a huge impact on kids' safety and well-being and mental health within the home. Neglect, being the victim of bullying, racism, etc. Childhood trauma is common. It's estimated that 50 to 60% of children experience childhood trauma.
It's good tune.
Slide. What does trauma look like? The student displays physical and emotional survival strategies. When kids are traumatized, they often, sort of are reactive to their environment. And again, the behaviors that we see that are problematic are a response to that trauma, and what they use in one setting may be behaviors that work in another setting. Things like withdrawal, opposition, dysregulation, which is basically a student's ability to sort of regulate their emotions, difficulty taking responsibility for their actions, re-traumatization, things like loud noises, smells, people that remind them of people that have hurt them, all can trigger students to be to sort of go into a sort of re-traumatization mode where they're again protecting themselves. I think the important thing is to understand that, again, that these behaviors, although we see them, for example, withdrawal is obviously is problematic in the school, because when the teacher is trying to teach and the student is, withdrawn, quiet, not responding. Again, that's a behavior that may work in a situation where that student is felt unsafe and withdrawn into themselves, again, to protect themselves. Why is it important for schools to be aware of childhood trauma? Childhood trauma impacts learning, behavior, and brain development, all of which have a potential impact on the child's academic success as well as the overall school environment. By understanding and responding appropriately to childhood trauma, schools can help reduce its negative impact, support critical learning, and create a more positive school environment for everyone. Eric?
What are some ways schools can help? Create safe and supportive learning environments, assess student needs and provide support, build social emotional skills, collaborate with students and families, support staff development and school community awareness, and adapt policies and procedures that support a trauma-informed education.
So Tom's going to talk about the difference between traditional and trauma-focused discipline. And the traditional discipline that we've used in the past in schools is effective on some kids, but not all kids. And kids with a trauma history don't respond in the same way to traditional discipline. So there needs to be some modifications, and Tom's going to talk about trauma-focused discipline and differences.
So in the left section, the traditional that perhaps many, if not all of us, grew up with were the traditional frame basically is focused on the individual. Difficult behaviors are the result of individual deficiencies. Something is quote unquote wrong with them. Negative labels are applied to the student, lazy, manipulative, etc. Behaviors are believed to be purposeful or intentional. Adult authority or control is central to the effectiveness. One size fits all. Belief that punishment works. Change comes from the student. And the trauma-focused lens, to look at student behaviors, is about restorative practices, recognizes the role of the environment. Trauma may not be behind all difficult behaviors, but it is considered as a possibility. Reactive behaviors are recognized as effective in some environments. Student is trying to get their needs met. Adults believe that flexibility and individual approaches are needed, and that student and family engagement is critical to healing from trauma, and that everyone has a role in preventing trauma and re-traumatization.
Create a safe and supportive learning environments. The school creates a safe physical and emotional environment. The school recognizes and reduces trauma and trauma-related triggers. The school implements crisis prevention and intervention practices and provides trauma-sensitive professional development to teachers and school staff. The school reflects on culturally relevant norms and practices of students, families, and staff and responds equitably. Ask to assess student needs and provide support. School assessments consider the potential presence and impact of trauma. Assessment practices are trauma sensitive. Student plans consider trauma-related needs, and students have access to trauma-specific resources and staff. Another thing we would like to promote to build social emotional skills. The school integrates universal strategies to teach and model emotional regulation and pro-social behaviors. Students learn about stress and traumatic stress. The school educates families on the effects of stress and traumatic stress and how to foster wellness and resilience. The school integrates formal strategies for helping students cope with stress and adversity. Collaborate with students and families. Students and families are given opportunities to express concerns. Staff supports a student and family-centered approach. Students, families, and school staff are active partners. Schools work in partnership with students and families to integrate and sustain a trauma-sensitive approach. School support staff development and school community awareness. All staff has a baseline understanding of trauma and its impact on students and staff. Staff engages in ongoing learning about trauma-sensitive practices. The school addresses the effect of trauma on staff and promotes staff wellness and resilience. Adapt policies and procedures that support a trauma-informed education. Discipline, communication, and safety procedures reflect an understanding of trauma and trauma sensitivity. The school reviews policies and procedures regularly to ensure alignment with core principles of trauma sensitivity, and staff, students, and families are involved in review of policies and procedures.
The support provided to all students is at 4 levels or 4 tiers. The first tier is the universal tier. Universal support is directed at all students based on best practice. Tier 2, directed at some students who need additional support. Tier 3 is individualized support for a small number of students with more intensive needs. And Tier 4, alternative programming for students with the most intensive needs.
So I was going to talk about Tier 1. So Tier 1, levels of services, again, is for all students. Everyone understands trauma and its impact. Safe, authentic, and caring relationships are formed, which heal trauma. Staff assure the emotional and physical safety of all students in their care. Students are viewed individually and holistically with a strength growth mindset. Staff support choices which empower students and families.
Tier 2 is a check-in, check-out system. Review by school climate committee, small group with school counselor, FBA, which is a functional behavioral assessment, and upstream means it's system-wide. So instead of reacting individually, it's a system-wide approach and behavioral plans.
Tier 3 is individual sessions with a school counselor, access to a second adult, a coordinated service plan, referral to outside agencies, and interim alternative placement.
When we moved to Tier 4, we entered the layer of special ed. So we knew that you have been learning about MTSS, or our layered support, and that's why we rolled this out to you in tiers, so you can look at least to most intensive. And in the world of tiers and layers, the most intensive is special ed, and then within the tier of special ed is a whole continuum of tiers. So Tier 4 would include its own layered supports from least to most intensive. Our continuum of supports moves from a student receiving special education services fully supported by the general education teacher within the school classroom to being moved by the principal to an interim alternative placement for up to 45 days. So when Tom said an interim alternative placement, principals are allowed to place a student, if some place existed, where they could go for 45 days and receive further assessment if they were traumatized and caught in a reenactment cycle, and have services wrapped around them, individualized, do professional development with their team in school, and get them back to school. So that is an option available if a principal had a place to send someone. Students experiencing trauma may engage in reenactments of their trauma in such an intensive way that they may need to receive wraparound services from an external school team. Children who are traumatized, like Levi said and everyone talked about, there could be a noise or a smell in the room, And we may not be aware of that at all. And that smell is associated with their continued abuse. So they go into a reenactment cycle and they think they're in the room with their abuser. And that's what a reenactment is. They don't see and hear us at that time. They're back during the abuse, reliving it and reenacting it in our schools. And if they fall into that pattern and can't come out of it, they need to go somewhere to get some more therapeutic wraparound to address that, getting back to school. They may need further assessment and placement in a separate classroom or building. Rutland Northeast boards have been probably the most supportive boards that I have ever worked with or known about in regards to our special ed services. And one of the things you have always done is really supported our separate buildings. So one of the things that we want to talk about is perhaps Sudbury, but the last thing we really felt was important for you to see is what barriers exist to implementing trauma-informed education, because the PowerPoint is very positive, but of course there are variables that get in the way of moving forward. The tendency of school personnel to see trauma as a home problem rather than a community problem. School staff place blame rather than solution-focused. We saw in traditional discipline, Tom talked about how the child is blamed rather than looking at the system and how we can support. So we want to be solution-focused and not blame-focused. Impact on staff when they experience secondary trauma or compassion fatigue. That's really true, that if you're helping traumatized child, you can have secondary trauma, and 50 to 60% of all children have experienced trauma. Children become adults, it means 50, 60% of us have been traumatized, and we're in the building supporting traumatized children, so we need to take care of ourselves as well. Adults who work in education have a hard time balancing individual needs of a student with the needs of a whole class, and lack of resources to meet the needs within an SU. So those would be barriers to meeting the needs of children with trauma. I had a lovely tour with, oh yes, I'm sorry, Eric. Excuse me. Yes, Derek.
Yeah, no.
Do you have a question?
No, I do not.
Anyone have any questions for Levi? Tom? Eric? No. Okay. So,
Actually, I do have a question. Something that Eric mentioned from one of the earlier slides was the approach of using cultural sensitivity to some traumatized kids, implemented with some kind of equity base. Could you talk more about that? I'm not sure. Could you expand on that?
Sure, just basically recognizing that everyone has their own worldview and to respect that and to work within that. So if a child is coming from a different culture, we're going to embrace that culture. We're going to work with that culture. We're not going to say, well, we're in America now. This is the way we do things. It's all about meeting the child where their needs, where we can meet their needs. We're not going to ask them to step up that we can help them. We're going to get to their level and make them comfortable enough that we can get them from more of a stress reaction with some of these trauma triggers to a place of learning. There's science behind it that once our brain goes to a fight, flight, or freeze mode, that learning is incapable. It's like you're running late for work and you're trying to remember where your keys are. And if you weren't stressed, you'd know exactly where you left them. But there's just something in the brain where when you're facing incredible stress that you can't think. So if a teacher is getting loud with a student and saying, how come you didn't know this answer, it's just going to reinforce that trauma. The child feels like they're powerless. It's going to make things worse for them, and they need to be in a place where they're ready to learn before learning can occur.
thank you, Eric. That was a great question. Anyone have any other questions? Yes, Laura.
I'm curious to know how you identify kids with trauma, or, how do you, first of all, you don't want to identify every single kid who has trauma, so how do we help everyone? How do we make sure that we're not,
Levi, you want to try that one?
Sure. So basically, that's what the MTSS system is for. It's for meeting the child in the way that's best for them. Okay. So we don't give, tier 4 services to a student unless we've gone through the other tiers. So it's really, when you see, behaviors in a student within a classroom, if that student's needs can be met within that classroom, it'd be those tier 1 supports. And if they respond to that, they would remain in that tier 1. Okay, so it's just like the tiers with academics. You don't move on to second and third tier if the academic needs can be met within that first tier. I mean, I've always said it's a right of the student in order for them to remain in that general ed class with their other students, right? That's their right. And if we can meet their needs there, we do that. So again, if their needs can be met in tier 1, they stay in tier 1. If they met, and we track this data. We have systems at each school where behaviors are monitored and tracked. And again, we do assessments on students who have difficult behaviors to sort of figure out where they're coming from, if it's a history of trauma. And again, their recommendations and those tiers would be helpful.
So when you learn about MTSS, the principals all have an educational support team, and if that teacher is starting to see some indicators, they refer to the EST team, the brain cell, to get going, and then that moves forward from there, and that's how the layers come. So that team meets, brainstorms, talks about what can happen in the class, then if they move to tier 2, what can happen in the class with additional resources or some out of the class, and it moves up from there. So like Levi said, if the data indicates they're responding, then you don't move forward with your layers. Is that?
Yes, and I guess my only other question was, what if you don't, well, I guess I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. What if a student doesn't show any outward signs of trauma, and there's no behavioral issues?
Well, that might be withdrawal.
Okay.
So Lori, that's such a good point, because we see students that maybe don't rise to the attention because they aren't doing anything that's getting in the way of other people's learnings, but they're being self-destructive and getting in the way of their own learning.
Sure.
And that's also an indication.
And that's really that tier 1, the classroom supports where, the teacher has a good relationship with all of their students, and they know, when students are with the difference between being just, shy and being withdrawn. Again, really getting to know their students.
And also the social, emotional learning that takes place. Last year was the first year we had brought it to every classroom at Leicester. And things that we would talk about is getting to recognize emotions and finding a trusted person to talk to if you have a problem. So that's a great tier 1 level where everybody can recognize, okay, I'm starting to feel a little upset now. Maybe I don't like the way my friend's talking to me. So I'm going to ask them to stop. And then if they keep going on, and maybe I'll ask them again, I'm going to go find an adult in the room to help me. Instead of escalating that conflict, we're going to find a way to keep small problems small.
And I would just add, and thank you for your question, because I think it shows support for kids and not wanting to offer them support and not wanting to label. But I would just say that who comes through our doors each day, that many of them will offer information about their own trauma, in terms of disclosure to their teacher, their guidance counselor, the fact that they live in a pretty, and again, this gets to Eric's cultural piece. In our area, it's about, food insensitivity or parents' incarceration or previous events, that they will come and disclose or offer to us. And, I always say when a kid is acting out, they're more likely reaching out, for that kind of support that we seek to offer them.
So often when we have students that are traumatized too, this kind of goes further in your questioning. Some of our students, and Rutland Northeast should be very proud of the fact that we don't send our children to residential, but if they have mental health issues or family issues, they may go and we just pay for the educational component. When those students come back to us, to put them back in that school and in that classroom can be devastating because they've been in a very regimented environment that's been controlled. So part of how you help, we talked about this too, and I'll talk a little bit to present, that we have to be sensitive that you can't just dump them in a classroom with 20 kids in the 3rd grade if they've been away getting help. And so that's another area where they might need a separate school or they might need wrapping. We have that offered for high school students. The students at one side of North Campus are pre and post residential. And that's when I talked about trauma sensitive. I thought maybe that was why you wanted to learn about it too. We do that for some high school students up there, and they are traumatized students. And they're post-residential or pre-residential, and so it's a step down or a step up. Today I had a beautiful tour of Sudbury, and one of the things I just wanted to put out there, which I know the board is looking at facilities, in special ed we service what pops that year. So since I've been with Rutland Northeast, we must have had 20 alternative programs. Many of them come and go. They serve what is the issue at the time and what is needed, because it's based on who comes to our doors this day, this month, this year. And if we think about our population of students right now that might need more, it's this population of students. We also have an evaluation team. Levi's part of the centralized evaluation team at Rutland Northeast. That includes 3 psychologists in SLP and a secretary, and we have a triple E staff. So when I look at Sudbury, I see great possibilities if you ever wanted to designate it as a special ed building. And the possibilities I see is to have a triple E room where during COVID we had a very hard time with our students who don't come to us for pre-K, go out of our district but want service and for evaluation. The first classroom would not need anything to be renovated except all of our stuff brought in. Our triple E staff offices would be here. We'd have an evaluation place for them, a meeting place for them, and a place to meet that need for our families, triple E and pre-K evaluation. The second room could be a room for wraparound for any of the trauma children that might have a 45-day placement, interim placement, or be pre and post residential. And the final room, as the special ed director, because of COVID, I have $120,000 for K to 12 and $20,000, Brenda will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind. Brenda knows it's around there, for renovations, and I could use those dollars to do some renovation here, and the final room would be the offices for the school psychologists. The director of special services would be in the old principal's office, and we would actually move special education, and it would be both for staff and children. So you know your building would always be filled during the school day because we'd be busy with our work, and we would also invite children here, but we would have offices here and administrative staff. Rutland Northeast Supervisor Union office is in the basement, needs to be renovated. The money could be used here instead. So that's a consideration for the board. I'm always looking at what's popping, looking at what we need to do to service, and that for special ed would be a wonderful thing right now. Eric talked about the possibility of bringing kids over who are traumatized. We have lovely, lovely land here about an after-school program, about a summer program, and about all those wonderful things. My final statement will be, if you designated this to special ed, you'd be surprised what would happen.
Thank you. Levi, could you stop sharing? Thank you. Perfect.
Does anybody on the board have any questions for any of our presenters? Kevin.
So we just heard that, was it 50 to 60% of people, or students, have experienced trauma, is that correct?
Children.
Maybe we need to be talking about turning OV into the trauma center, since it's apparently majority. I spoke this weekend about Vermont soldiers in the Overland Campaign in 1864. Every one of them experienced trauma, very significant trauma in battle, and they came back to run the state. So I can put this in the form of a question if you'd like, but if we're talking about a majority of our population, that's, we all sat here and kind of blithely listened to it. That's an overwhelming social issue. It makes me wonder if a functioning society, functioning democracy is possible if we're talking about medicalizing over half of our population. It seems to me a number that's almost unworkable, and to have a functioning school system. So I wanted to throw that out there.
Do you want to reply to that at all?
I'll reply to it. I think that the data was 50 or 60% of children have experienced trauma. Trauma is a continuum of trauma, and if we, when we meet with staff and we talk about trauma, people in this room have been traumatized. It's a continuum. So some are severely traumatized, some aren't. Some can be resilient and bounce back if their needs are met and they're being fed well and they have a good home and they're loved. So it depends upon all the other variables. So yes, we've experienced trauma, but it doesn't mean we're incapable of learning, all of us. And that's why the layered and tiered support. Because if we're more traumatized, then we get more support. If we're more resilient, we get less support. So it is a variable approach, very individualized. It doesn't mean 60% of the students are reenacting.
Barry?
Marcia, can I ask you a question that might seem a little oversimplified, but when I think about North Campus, to me, it's an asset, it's a building, it's a facility, but it houses an operation, and when you put the two of those together, in my mind, it creates a process, right? So there's a process that goes on there. With respect to that process, prior to any conversation about Sudbury School, would you assess that process as being adequate with the combination of facilities and operation? Is it in need of change?
Are you asking about North Campus?
I am.
I did prepare a report for the board, and I think that speaks to...
No. I guess what I'm trying to say, and I probably don't articulate very well, but prior to the Sudbury conversation, would your assessment of that operation that you oversee, would that accommodation have been sufficient in your eyes, or did you see a driving need for change there as far as location goes?
North Campus is a premier facility because it allows flexibility. When I look at this facility, I don't have as much flexibility. So the beauty of North Campus has always been that you can have two different populations. It's got plenty of room. Everything I put in the report, that has served many different students, many different programs. The flexibility of that facility, none of our other facilities have that flexibility. We are actually admired throughout the state that high school has that site and has that level of flexibility. Whatever pops is met and always has been. You can ask Mr. Avery. That campus has served a phenomenal role for OV, and it serves a phenomenal role for Rutland Northeast special education budget. It prevents out-of-district placement, which is severely expensive.
And the reason I asked the question, and this part of it is more for my colleagues, Marcia, than for you, trying to frame up in my mind this conversation. We have two entities, really. We have the Sudbury School and the North Campus. And one of my mantras was, any process change that we implement should really result in an improvement or enhancement or a betterment of that process. When I look at the North Campus, it sounds as though the combination of facilities and operation is sufficient for your needs or what you're trying to accomplish. When I look at Sudbury School, a little ways back in time, this board decided that the Sudbury School operation would be better served in a different location. So this process was improved by moving. And that left this building as not a process, merely an asset. So when I think about decisions we make, what's driving the decisions, how do I frame it in my mind? I think that the driver for our focus is this asset, and how do we best utilize this asset, as opposed to the North Campus potential relocation, which doesn't seem to be a process in need.
I wasn't recommending that.
No, and I'm talking to my colleagues. I was looking at you, but I'm talking to my colleagues.
You're reflecting.
So as I frame that up in my mind that way, does that seem logical to people, or am I looking at that the wrong way? Or I guess I'm kind of curious as to how anyone else on the board feels on that. That our driver and our focus and our driver, our needs to be met is truly this asset that we're sitting in right now. And what's the best use of this asset? And that really falls under a completely different umbrella as truly just an asset versus a process. Because it probably wouldn't take a lot of changes in use of this building to improve its use, because it's not being used for anything. So I guess in my mind, I would like to keep our conversations around, and maybe I'm wrong, but what is the best use of this asset versus can we shoehorn something in here to kind of take it off the table for now, at risk of perhaps a cost to the existing process? Those are my thoughts, and I don't know how anyone else feels, but I thought I'd put that out there because as we have continuing conversations, that's what I'm going to be bouncing the ideas against.
Anyone want anything to?
No, I agree with Barry 100%. I think when, like you said, when we're looking to move the kids from this facility to another facility, you know, I'm sure there's people that said, oh, it won't work because of this and that, but we looked at the bigger picture as to what would be better that would suit the kids. So yes, I fully agree with what you're saying, Barry.
Anyone else? I think my question to Marcia and to you, Barry, is that I think we've, and I could be out of line here, but I think that we have determined probably that North Campus will stay at North Campus.
Yeah.
However, do we want to, as a board, see this asset, Sudbury School, used in the way that Marcia is presenting to us, to use it as a, sounds like it would be more used for younger kids.
In conjunction.
Right, in conjunction. So, you know, North Campus is for older students, and this would be used for younger students. And she also has said in the past that that it could also allow for students out of district to come here potentially.
And that would provide process improvement really for the operation that Marcia's overseeing. And that's really my goal.
Process improvement if we want to, just with kids coming. So we are involved in advanced training with Dave Melnick, which is trauma. We have a senior level expert right here, Mr. Flory, who's in stage 2. And we have Eric and Levi and I have taken the beginning stages of trauma, and we also have other people on staff. So we are very interested in this, very involved in this, and learning about this. This is best practice, and this is all about, if you don't designate this to special ed, then I will just pursue renovating the current office space in the bottom of the RNSU offices. I would be excited to have you designated, but there's certainly no pressure. It would be an improvement process for the evaluation team in special ed, because this building is much nicer than the basement at Rutland Northeast Supervisory.
Derek had a question first.
Yeah. What are the competing ideas for this space?
That's a good question. I don't think we have any, the answer, but Jean?
Couple of thoughts. When Marcia just said, you know, if you didn't designate the space for special ed, the psychologist could remain in the basement, but that doesn't address the other issues that she had of addressing the needs of the elementary students who potentially will need to leave district at a greater cost. Also, I just want to put a plug in that if you want to hear more about the funding that Marcia talked about having through COVID ESSER funds, Brenda can speak to that. That's up to you. And then thirdly, your question, Derek. The other things that we would probably bring forward to you is at one time, and I don't know how they handled the hold on this, but our ARK our childcare program at Whiting was interested in expanding to this building. And the other possibility that the district would like to see with this space is a professional development center, a place where the coaches could work, a place where we could do in-house professional development, et cetera. In fact, we're holding an administrators meeting here tomorrow because this room is much larger than that small boardroom for the 20 of us to get together, or 16 of us to get together. So it would be, we didn't last year, but last year was COVID. We would like to use the building, but if we focused on children first, my support would be what Marcia is recommending.
And thank you, Jean, because I forgot to talk about this building and PD and other things that can happen in this room. So that could be part of it. Thank you, I forgot that. I wanted to have an organic conversation with you, so I didn't write it down, I didn't prepare anything, because this is truly organic. It's a discussion.
So I will tell you that as, go ahead, Kim.
Maybe this is something that's come up, but I'm concerned about the least restrictive environment issue in that, while I'm very sympathetic with the idea that we can't have disruption in classrooms, especially excessive disruption, I'm concerned that this is about as the most restrictive environment we could have in the district, in that it's a small school, physically isolated, miles apart from everything else. And I'm also concerned with the idea of, I don't know how small children react, but I think teenagers react to North Campus, at least some of them, by thinking, well, the school, the adults have designated me as somebody who's incorrigible and they've sent me out here, and so I guess that's what I am. And there's a kind of self-reinforcing definition that goes on. And I'm concerned that the physical environment could produce that reaction as well. So, legally, we're obligated to provide the least restrictive environment. Physical isolation alone, I think, is a challenge to that goal.
I can also address that. By law, it's 80% of students need to be in the general ed classroom, and there is an honesty that 20% may not to be at all times. How we're evaluated is by 80%, and I presented here that there'd be a 45-day alternative placement. I did not say that students would be here as their school or be here every day all year. I presented it as a reenactment place if people couldn't get it together, that if principal consent for 45 days, which is not considered restrictive, it's considered therapeutic to wrap around them, teach them, and get them back to the building. So no students are coming here for their school. They're coming here for therapeutic wraparound to get them back to their school.
Is that true for North Campus as well?
No, North Campus does not have incorrigible students in it. I did write a report that does speak to North Campus that you could read.
I just read it. Okay, my question would be, when students go to North Campus, how long do they stay then?
It's done through an individual IEP plan, and the team determines placement and length of stay.
Becky?
I work at the Addison County Parent-Child Center in Middlebury, and every child and parent that is there has been traumatized, and they're thankful that they are out of the system and they are at a place where they're having wraparound services. And I can say that as a professional, it's also very hard for kids if they've had trauma in their life to continuously, you don't have any resiliency skills, so somebody can roll their eyes at you, somebody can trip you, and that is not the same if I get tripped as it is if a kid who's been traumatized over and over. It causes much more psychological damage, and it would be better for kids to have a place, to have a break, and be able to gain some resiliency skills.
Thank you. Derek?
Yeah, I support the idea of a therapeutic model being available within our district. When you get into the realm of special education, it's an area that I'm familiar with, and the law speaks to the least restrictive, most appropriate. It's a double phrase that is often forgotten, the second part about being most appropriate. And there is a team that makes the decision about what the most appropriate learning environment is needed for this child, and then they just determine whether that's available in the district, or if not, where is it available, and then that's why we pay exorbitant prices to outside the district placements. So if we can develop that continuum of support services within our district that includes a therapeutic model where we can move kids to a place where they can be more resilient and then return to their neighborhood schools, so to speak, as they're stronger emotionally or however, their needs are getting met, and that's what I think I'm hearing that we're trying to do. So I'm supportive of it.
I have a question as far as, it's a 45-day, you can have them outside of school for 45 days. What if that's not enough time? How do you keep them, how does that work?
The team would meet and determine next steps.
Okay.
I mean, that really is individualized based on
Sure.
the team. And, we, like I said, what pops, what works, we be responsive. Be responsive to individual needs, whatever that means. What if they have to stay an extra 5 days? It's no longer an interim alternative placement. Now they have a plan that places them here. They need 5 or 10 extra days. I mean, I don't know that that would happen, Lori, but there's always options.
Well, I didn't know if it was one of those, you're here for 45 days, oh, you're back in regular
That's
school,
an
and then,
interim alternative placement by the principal that the law allows without changing placement. Once you're longer than that, you're changing placement. There's a process for that and a team that does that. Because in the world of special ed, there's a law and rule and regulation for everything. So everything you ask, I go to a book and it tells me what to do.
okay,
I mean, it really is that regimented.
okay.
If it's deemed appropriate, can they go back before the 45 days, or
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
if it's deemed appropriate, can they go back before the 45 days?
Oh, yes.
Or do they have to stay the
Oh,
full entire?
sure. Oh, of course. What a good question. It's just that up to 45 days, the law says a principal can do that.
Okay,
So I was just telling you what the law was for your principals. And some principals would like sometimes to have that happen, but I think you could ask Mrs. Alexander to my left, who actually has worked through some very traumatized students at Lothrop and done that internally by kind of replicating what I'm talking about inside a school, and it's been very difficult. And, she can speak to that it may not take 45 days. So again, it's individualized and responsive.
okay, thank you.
And how does that work with parents?
Parents usually are very interested in these services because they see that they work, and if they don't work, then we need to change them. Again, it's individualized and responsive.
Okay.
And parents are part of that process.
Oh, they're part of the team, actually. The guardian and the surrogate parent, or the parent, anyone legally has to be involved, and they actually have to allow and agree to it. We can't just do that without them.
Okay,
not allowing
so
it.
there's that as well, so if they
That's the
didn't want it,
team
then.
and law.
Derek, did I see your hand up?
No.
Okay. Okay, is there any other questions regarding trauma and placements? Because at this point, I think I would like, thank you very much for all of that information. It's very good for us to hear that.
We were so pleased to be asked to come. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having us.
We love
We're
to
very
have-
excited to come.
We love to hear from you guys. So, at this point, we really need to talk about facilities. The Sudbury School obviously is empty currently. We have an option from Marcia. I'm curious, and maybe not the rest of you, but I am curious about, and since Steve Eaton is here, I would love to hear from you about our Leicester issues, because I wonder if Sudbury might somehow play into that.
I can give you a rundown on the PFAS issue, but, well, let me move up here.
Sure.
So, back in 2019, the state had us start testing for PFAS, and that was not just us, that was every private water system across the state. In 2019, we tested fine. We were put on a 1-year sampling plan, The following year, we came back, and lo and behold, we discovered PFAS in our water system. That started a process called a site investigation, which it's really, we have no choice but to follow the state guidance and do the site investigation. The initial site investigation was approved by the state through our engineers, and it included drilling 5 test sample wells around our septic area. It also meant that we had to pull our well pump out, do some flow testing, also seal off some veins, and check each vein of water coming into our well individually for contamination. So that was the site investigation part of it, or the initial part of the site investigation. The second part is what they call an alternatives analysis. And this part of it's dictated through the agency of, well, it's through the ANR again, it's through the Drinking and Groundwater Division. So the Drinking and Groundwater Division wants us to come up with a way to provide safe water, drinkable water to the school. So the site investigation that we're in right now through the wastewater part of the ANR is ongoing. They've basically discovered that, or they're pretty sure that our septic system is the source of contamination. None of the contamination, they've determined by testing wells in the area, individual wells in the area, private wells, that contamination has not migrated to those other people's wells, which is a great thing, especially. So,
It's a really great thing.
That's a good thing. The next part of the site investigation is to find out, now that they know where the source is, they want to clean up the source, and they also want to add 5 more test wells to see how far the contamination's actually migrated on our property. So that's in the process. We're working with Weston and Sampson to finish that part of it up. And depending on what they find from their other sample wells, test wells, they will either have more recommendations or no more recommendations for us. The alternatives analysis part of it was submitted to the drinking water portion of the ANR. They rejected our first plan, which was because we actually found a vein in the well that was not contaminated. So we submitted a plan saying we wanted to lower our pump down into that vein, shroud off the rest of the well, and take our water from that good vein. They rejected that. So we resubmitted another analysis that said, okay, we're still going to lower the pump down into the bottom of the well where we have sufficient water and clean water. But instead of just putting a shroud in the well to seal off, we're actually going to seal the rest of the veins and any other water from getting into our well casing. And they accepted that. They liked that. So where we're at right now with that is that our engineers will be moving forward with getting the right people there on site to do this work. The site investigation part of this is the money is really not recoverable, possibly other than through insurance. The alternatives analysis part of it, for preparing the alternatives analysis and also for the work involved with the alternatives analysis to get our drinking water back to where it should be, is covered by a grant. So I just learned all this week actually, so it was like Monday or or something that we just barely got this information. So that's where we're at right now. So we fully expect the work under the alternatives analysis to be covered by a grant. That's basically it. Yeah, Barry.
Steve, maybe it's too early, but just so I can understand what might be, if it hasn't been determined that the septic has impacted any other wells, is there a way of knowing that that will not happen, or it's just a likelihood that it may happen at some point in time, or?
That's why they want to take the site investigation to the next step and add 5 more test wells on our property to see how far it has migrated or if it's still migrating.
And what would be like the proximity of any of those other wells to our property where that likelihood could happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Are they far away or nearby?
It's really hard for me to judge that.
Don't know.
Very,
Yeah.
I suspect that I suspect that after this next step, we'll have that answer. After doing those other 5 test wells and monitoring them. The other part of it is that this is they want us to clean our septic system completely as well. You know, so hopefully then we have to monitor what goes into our septic system very closely. So
I think just to add a couple of things that Steve, you shared with me, we expect that from here to eternity, we will have more water testing regularly. So we expect that that will be another layer of protection against that, because if it shows up on our property, then it's that, then they'll ramp it up to going back to test wells around our property to make sure it's not leaching off of our property.
Brenda, I remember one time at one of the facility meetings, you had said, if I remember it right, that there will never be an option for like a town sewer connection to that school, right?
There isn't a town sewer in Leicester. And under current rules in regards to septic and wastewater, we would never be able to build an alternative septic system on our property. So we would have to do something similar to what Whiting School did, which was actually put in a pump system and pump our waste somewhere and find a partner or land or someplace to pump it to. And that's why every night we say a little prayer to whatever and whoever we believe in, that our septic system is still good.
right.
Okay.
Anything else about water or anything about facilities in general?
I guess my biggest question is just cost, and it sounds like some of this stuff is gonna be covered by grant, but if we have to clean out the septic system or, you know, are we looking at oodles and oodles of money?
We're looking at, for putting in those 5 test wells and cleaning our septic system, we're looking at approximately $25,000.
So in addition to, so as Steve said, the analysis, engineering services, and the construction to fix it is covered by a grant. But the first analysis, so in phase 2, and then the first analysis though that got us to this point would not be, and the additional testing that we're doing to make sure that we don't have any leaching would not be. But we are still, the state of Vermont still has emergency construction aid for costs in excess of $10,000, which we are going to do. We're going to hit. So we have filed an insurance claim to see if there's any insurance, and if there is not any insurance, then we will follow up with the state construction grant as well. That covers 30% of it. Something better than nothing, but
So, and then like we said before too, after those other 5 wells are in, that'll determine if we have to continue with more site investigation or not. So, like I said, we're doing 6 we have no choice.
I guess my question is just when, you know, if this continues to progress and progress and progress, is when do we say, okay, we just can't, you know, is there a point, or do we just keep spending the money until they tell us that we're done?
That's up to you.
You know what I mean?
That's a good question.
I know, that's kind of, you know.
I would say you're gonna have a lot more information the next time the state comes back to us after having those 5 wells.
Okay.
New wells put in, you're gonna have a lot more and a better picture of really where things are at.
Okay, because I'm just curious if that continues to be a problem, if Sudbury is gonna have to be utilized somehow for those kids. Derek?
Are those wells that they're putting in for the analysis, will those continue to be monitoring wells that'll be available?
They will, they will. And like I said, we have 5 in place now. There'll be another 5 in place after that. Yeah, and then.
So through a monitoring program, they'd be able to pick up if there was migration of contamination?
Yeah. I mean, that may fall on us at some point to actually, you know, do that.
Yeah.
But they have not said that yet.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? Questions for Steve? Thank you.
You have a question for Steve about the blue at the end of this building.
Oh, yeah, I do. When are you gonna fix the end of that tarp looking thing that we've had there since, I don't know when?
The Hobbit hole.
Yeah.
I know she has this question for you because she keeps asking me.
Right, I'm like,
so
why aren't we fixing that? I know we don't have any kids here, but.
Ask her if she wants brown.
Can we paint it that brown so it doesn't look so bad?
That's really basically why. There's more to it than just filling dirt back in, because it's actually, what was happening is there's dirt being washed down around the tunnel, and it fills in the back door, and when they were having school here, you couldn't open the emergency door because the dirt was washing down in there. So that was our initial fix. The school hasn't been utilized, and the tarp hasn't been keeping the dirt out of there, so
It's just an eyesore every time I go by it, which I go by it every day.
so.
Look the other direction.
I can't look in the other
Get a
direction.
brown tarp.
So,
We get a brown eraser.
all right, well, there you go. All right, maybe you could get a brown tarp.
But, yeah, anytime.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you,
I
Steve.
completely forgot about that. Okay, so, other options for this particular building, do you have any?
Just what I already just
Okay.
said. Yeah.
Does anybody want to talk about any of those other alternative?
Well, I mean, part of me thinks, when we look at Lester, Whiting, Sudbury, how much it costs to upkeep each of those buildings. And I think back to when I was 16 years old and I had this old vehicle that I kept putting good money into something that I should have gotten rid of. And I love the vehicle. And I think we all feel the same way. We love the building. But when do we look at saying, okay, Lester, we got to pay X amount of dollars to keep maintaining that facility? Should we look at Sudbury as an option? I mean, I know we've moved kids from here to there to here, and all over, but should we look at one building to put all our resources into, as opposed to keep maintaining 3 buildings?
I do want to, as you're considering that, just to remind you that linked to your agenda tonight is the PowerPoint where Brenda speaks to what it would mean to no longer own a building and what debt each building comes with that you would be continuing to pay whether you owned it or not. I also would point out that, which I hadn't told you yet, that Otter Creek Academy, Leicester School, is up by about 15 kids this year. So they're over 80 again. And, you know, when you ask about other ideas, there's always the question of should 2 classes come back here. having 2 grades here was not ideal, but it's a possibility if Leicester gets too crowded. The ability to use all 3 schools and flex them is a plus.
Going back to what Barry said earlier about process and assets, I think this is an opportunity to think outside the box more. I remember back at Act 46, we talked about the possibilities of things like a Spanish immersion school for the district. This location would be ideal, I think, for nature-oriented programs for the entire district. And I do think we need to consider that sort of magnet school approach as part of the future of our district. I think we need to think about the district as offering as many paths to successful completion of a high school education as possible, including, you know, Muslimu is a very successful program, keeps a lot of kids in school who might depart otherwise. That sort of approach, or a language immersion kind of approach, or something that doesn't occur to me at the moment, but I don't think we've talked enough about thinking big with our facilities.
I'm writing this all down so that, I mean, we're not gonna make any decision tonight. And I think there also needs to be some cost benefit analysis to all of these options. So,
Well, just to be clear, because usually the cost benefit analysis would result, would be something that I would do. You haven't outlined an option for me to cost benefit. Have you?
not
Okay,
yet,
good.
not yet.
Okay,
No,
good.
but I mean, but that's the thing, we have, whatever options we come up with, we're gonna have to look at cost benefit to, to make sense, to make sure it makes sense for us, because we don't wanna go backwards as far, we've done really well, I think, with, keeping our costs as minimal as possible. Contracts are things that we have to pay, but we're cognizant of trying to keep it, to be able to keep everybody here in town and being able to stay.
I was just trying
First
to write
taxes.
down. Brenda, did you get that report yet? 'Cause
Yeah,
I don't
no.
know what you're asking me to do.
No, not yet, so,
Okay.
but we could get there at some point. I mean, there is the cost benefit analysis of, you could do a cost benefit analysis of what, Marcia is proposing. I think that all of the pieces are there that you could do that.
And I don't, there's no pressure, please, but that decision for the money is by November for special ed funding. So that to put into this building, that decision has to be made by November. And again, that's no pressure to the board, just you should know that's the date.
Okay. Any,
Yeah, Lori, can I just say something
Sure.
quick? I think what Marcia provided was kind of like a feasibility discussion, right? She kind of gave a stamp of approval that, what she's suggesting has good feasibility for this location. And some of the other things that, that Kevin is kind of throwing out there, as we kind of narrow them down a little bit, even prior to cost benefit, I think feasibility should be, as Marcia did, should be, a prior conversation.
I will tell you that, before we were Act 46 together, Sudbury had always thought about being its own magnet school. We wanted to be that technology place because, of course, we had Mr. F. and he was great at that. And we thought we could really do that STEM stuff. But honestly, you have to have really good staff in order to do that. They all have to know tech in and out. So to offer something like that, you really got to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row, and
that study would tell you that.
And that study would tell you that, yeah. And at the time, it just wasn't feasible to do it. It would cost too much money. But that could change.
Have good Wi-Fi.
Well, and I don't think we still do. I mean, we're still stuck with,
Much better,
with Otelco. So, okay. Anybody else? Questions for anyone? Continue to talk about facilities. We also talked about a middle school model. That stuff was in your packet. Do we want to continue to go down that road again? It is possible, according to what the architects gave us as a preliminary. The question is, do you want to continue to consider that?
Or do you want a presentation on
Right,
it? Or?
and they're, right.
I think it's something we should consider, and I mean, I think a presentation on it would be great.
What does everyone else think?
I don't know. I don't know.
You do have information in your packet.
We do. And as I looked at that, and having been part of that task team that looked a lot of those things early on, I think kind of what came back, and I'm not really on top of all of it, but some of it almost seemed as though it was concessions made. To accomplish what you're looking to do, there'll be concessions made as far as locations and co-locations and things like that with respect to available space at Otter Valley, I thought. And again, I'm not on top of all the detail, but I think a lot of those concessions kind of changed the dynamic of that whole proposal for what we were looking to accomplish with middle school. And I don't know if the urgency is there to look at it as much now, but if we were, I'd like to understand if those were the only options, because a lot of them didn't seem that attractive to me.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Are you following you remember what they were talking about, splitting up the
Right.
additions and the...
Well, right, because they wanted to keep 5-8 away from those awful 9 through 12th graders. So, they wanted to have a segregation, as I recall, and it's kind of hard to do that in the current configuration.
I don't think there was enough space available.
Well, we'd have to add on, there's definitely, you know.
But even the adding on, I don't think they were going to be able to do it in the way that was given to them as a requisite. It was going to be like, okay, we could do that, but we're going to have to separate it into 2 additions or something like that, if I remember right.
I don't think I remember.
Yeah, there were a couple of negative
Yeah.
Okay.
Impacts.
impacts of the super.
Right.
Do we want to look at that again? And my question is if Mr. Avery has any comments regarding that, we'd like to hear from you too.
Just a short one, and I will tell you, I haven't thought about this for about 18, 19 months now.
Yep.
Okay? So it hasn't really been on my radar, but number one, I would say an architect can do anything. I mean, they can do anything. You go on and spend money. You can do anything. But the other pieces, as I remember, she didn't talk about building a gymnasium. She didn't talk about building a separate cafeteria facility. She didn't talk about a separate theater auditorium. So you're still sharing all of that stuff. And that was the challenge. And I think that's what I think Barry may be speaking to.
Okay.
So that's my first cut, having not really thought about it.
Okay, fair enough. Anyone else?
But I guess, Laura, your real question is, do we feel there's a need to revisit that now? Does the board think that now's the time to revisit that, or is there a driver for us to look at that right now?
Well, I think that we need, you know, if we were looking out 5 years from now, what do we see our schools looking like? And do we see a continued decline in enrollment? Do we see that we need to do something different for them? You know, best practice is the 5 through 8 middle school model, or at least I think it still is that way. You know, so we were trying to provide that in one space for all of those kids. Do we need to do that? I don't know. And so I'm curious, I mean, if we did a presentation on it, at least we would know whether or not we wanted to go down that road.
Part of the conversation was that Neshabie is very crowded.
Yes.
And now that we have the extra staff with ESSER funds, Neshabie and Leicester are very crowded, and Lothrop's filling up. I mean, now, all those positions are not going to stay beyond 3 years. But Gosh, Tom, you just increased student population by 20%, I figured out in my head. Nice job.
Did you do that all by yourself?
And as I look around the district, we're actually staying pretty stable district-wide. You know, Otter Valley's down, but that's because the incoming 7th grade class is smaller than the outgoing class. But as I did a pulse check, thank you to the principals over the last 24 hours, we're fairly stable, and we've been fairly stable for a while. We went significantly down over 10 years, but we've been fairly stable for a few years. I saw Debbie raise her hand.
Sure.
Sure, so just a thought. So my background before I was a principal was teaching that middle level, 5th and 6th grade. And there's a large difference between 5th grade students and 6th grade students. And I'm just wondering, because what I'm hearing is 2 of this, 2 of that. I won't begin to even think about that I even know what the plans are at Otter Valley, or the numbers at Neshabie and all of that. But I just wonder about the possibility of even considering, if that's still on the table, a 6, 7, 8. Like, would that accomplish what Neshabie needs? Would that mean a larger number of, would you need as much renovation at Otter Valley, that type of thing? Because 5th grade is just an interesting year because they can almost flex very easily and work with 4th grade. I think that it's easier for them to work with 4th grade than it is with 6th grade. I'm not saying they couldn't work with 6th grade, but it's just an interesting dynamic, and it's just something to throw out there. So.
Okay. Allison, I understand you have something you'd like to say.
I don't know why we can't.
Oh, I can't hear her.
No, she's unmuted. Nope. But you're not muted, so maybe sound? Truly, you're not. Okay, send me a text and no, it's too hard. How about if I mute you and unmute you again? Okay?
Yes. Can I talk?
Yeah, go ahead, yes.
So I know it's been about a year and a half or longer since the task force that we had, but one of the issues around the 5th, 6th grade, if we include both or not, really was driven from, you know, the experts saying to include 5th as a part of the middle school model. I know it's hard, it's kind of a debatable thing possibly, but that's ultimately we decided to move the 5th with the 6th, if in that model at least. We did go through in detail all the different areas where we wouldn't want overlap at the high school. Definitely in the locker room and a gym, specifically the locker room. So having a designated locker room was important, but we didn't see huge conflicts with sharing the cafeteria when those kids aren't in there. The locker room's tough because it's not a controlled environment. So we definitely wanted a gym and a locker room, but we were okay with sharing a cafeteria and an auditorium in the construction. The biggest driver though, for the whole idea, besides enhancing our middle school kids' experience, the whole driver besides enhancing that was looking at our elementary schools and seeing the crowdedness of Neshabie, what was going on with the 3 northern schools, and trying to think about how do we invest in elementary schools and have people in different towns far away want to invest money in an elementary school farther away where we knew we could centrally all decide to invest together in Otter Valley's campus. So say Neshabie needs a huge renovation, can we convince people in towns further away who might not use Neshabie? So if we brought 5th, 6th grade to Otter Valley, there's not as much of a driver to do renovations in Neshabie, in Lothrop, or at Leicester. In fact, at a certain point, I know this is a scary thought, but we might not need the northern schools. If we had 5th, 6th grade at Otter Valley, we would ultimately possibly, just possibly, only need Lothrop and Neshabie at that point. So we're simplifying the district, we're solving some of the elementary school issues, and we're enhancing our middle school experience. But our task force did determine whatever we decide, we are going to have to spend money. If the numbers stay the way they are right now, we can't send all of our kids to Neshabie, and people don't want to truck them all the way down to Lothrop. So we're kind of in that conundrum, but we knew the central campus idea, the super campus idea, was something that people would support. 5th, 6th graders would have that easier transition, for high school the sooner they got there. Anyway, I'll let Allison talk from this point onward.
Thanks. Allison?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Honestly, Greg, you said most of what I was going to say. I wanted to just reinforce that the data sort of spoke for itself. In that task force work we did a community-based survey where we had over almost 600 respondents. There was, the middle school model was favorable. One, because people didn't necessarily want to keep moving elementary kids, around to different schools. The consolidation was still very fresh in everybody's minds, I think, at that point. And beyond that, it was something that would enhance the district and make it a little bit more maybe attractive and marketable to families that are looking to move to the area. So I don't know how comfortable everyone is thinking about, how we would market the school in an effective way. But there's a lot of shifting happening in Vermont, and there's opportunity there to sort of, as Greg put it, build sort of an enhanced campus. And that supports the curriculum as well. That was the other conversation that we had quite a bit. I remember when we were doing the working groups, is that a true middle school model sort of supported the curriculum that's already being taught in the elementary schools. And so I just wanted to add, I do think it's worth you guys just hearing. There were a lot of tedious hours playing many different scenarios, lots of conversations, lots of community input. And to Jean's point, if we are growing or holding steady, there's still that overpopulation that we sort of need to address. And I think the thinking was, if we explored this middle school first to see if it was even plausible, and then beyond that, what the cost would look like, and sort of do that, benefits cost analysis, I think that it would be worth you guys just understanding the data behind even that suggestion, I guess, is what I wanted to add.
Natalie also asked for a presentation, just so you know.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Did you have a question, Karen?
I just wanted to make an announcement. It seems like there's a little restlessness behind us. People might want to leave. Somebody left their Nissan Leaf key, and I hung it from the door there, so.
Okay, all right, well, so I think at this point, we're ready to think about some next steps, and then we can let everybody, the restless natives, leave. So what is your thoughts about, Natalie would like a presentation. I've heard a couple other people say that a presentation makes sense. Would you like to see a presentation on a middle school model at OV? I'm
Yes.
seeing some
Yes.
nods.
Yes.
Okay, so yes
Can I
to that.
just add
Yes.
to that?
Yep.
Before COVID, one of the last meetings we had was in discussion about this. So we kind of got sidetracked for the last year and a half or so. Thank you. But one of the things we said was, as a board, we really couldn't wrap our heads around it without finding out the cost. We had them do up these plans, but I think that it was going to cost some more money for us to get the real costs, which obviously those costs are going to be different now than if we had done them a year and a half ago, which might be good, because honestly, we would have had to update those costs. But
Sure.
I don't know what, what we should do about that, if that's going to be part of our discussion.
Well, I think part of this is that.
It was pretty expensive just to get that realistic cost.
Right, well, so, and part of this is also that we do have new members on the board that have not really dwelled into that.
Yeah.
That, what we have, so I think we start with what we have, and then we can talk as a board as to what next steps are, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, because to Greg's point, we got sidetracked there or cut short, but
COVID kind of killed us.
I don't know as we ever really looked at this MBF proposal and hashed it out in detail as a board.
We really didn't.
Because I'm looking at what I was talking about earlier, I didn't think I was crazy, but in the report on the second page, it says the distance between middle school spaces wouldn't be as concerning on the first floor. However, the two zones on the second floor would be separated by a hallway with classrooms that are currently dedicated to the high school.
Yeah.
So it really wouldn't be separate spaces, which was kind of what we had given them as a requisite to design. So even the proposal that came back, we should probably look at that in detail as a group.
Okay,
I mean, we did have a gym in there and locker room too, so if that's not included, that's.
Okay. Well, then we will make sure that that presentation is at one of our next facility meetings, probably at North Campus in October, if possible.
Yep.
And then
also the cost benefit analysis on Marcia's proposal, only because we would need a decision on this school by November.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to be clear, November 1st.
Right, so this October 20th meeting is kind of when it has to be.
Yeah.
Per that, can we also have, I know there was a presentation, but it was even before I was on the board, as to why this is the ideal model?
Oh, sure. So you want to know why the...
A lot of new people beyond.
She'd like why the middle school model is the premier model, why we would even suggest this.
Because that was even before I came on the board, and I've been on for almost 3.
Yeah, it's all back to the task force.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, we did that at Whiting, right? with Andy?
Yep. Yes, I think so.
That
Okay.
was before me.
So if we could do that together, maybe.
I think that needs to come back as well.
We'll see. Okay. And then cost benefit, and then so I think at this point, we'll just keep following up with what we've been doing, or what we've talked about tonight. We'll keep it on the front burner. Okay? Okay, so I want to say thank you to everyone over there for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will dismiss you, so thank you.
Not that you have to go.
Right, I mean, you could stay. No one's, everyone's laughing at us.
Kevin, did you see anything else? The road, look, I found a hole in my bag.
That was it, that's all, yeah.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled
My
for
wallet was
anything
on the
else.
ground right here.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we have a few more minutes left before our meeting ends.
I need to head to work.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Eric, for coming. I appreciate it. Let's see, what does that say? So review our work plan. So essentially, we have reviewed our work plan already, and we're adding to October 20th, the 5th Street Middle School model.
And then you added it.
And,
Yeah, the middle school presentation and the cost analysis.
yeah.
steal your
So
chair.
just 2 more things before we go.
I'm gonna head to, Kobe's gonna lock up the windows and the
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So today, I wanted to let you all know that I testified in front of the State Board of Education in regards to Ripton and their possible placement in RNESU or OVUU. So we pretty much said that we did not want Ripton as they are too small and that we could possibly close them as soon as they were added to us because they're only a very small school. And so the State Board of Education listened to us. They will not become part of our district at all. And as a matter of fact, I think it was a tremendous turn of events. Essentially, the board told Ripton to stop the divorce between them and ACSD and get back together. So, so we'll see how that all turns out.
That'd also have a negative impact on our cost per pupil too.
It would, that's what she testified.
Yes, it would, and I did. So I testified to the fact that it would, all of that merger stuff that, we saved all that money would, gone. So, I just wanted to let you know that. And I also wanted to give Jean a few minutes. She wanted to give you kind of an update on the first few days of school.
I would like to, a state of the state, so to speak. I usually bring to you a positive spin on how things are going. as you likely know. Some people, I think that irritates. So I'm here tonight to say that it's not going quite so great right now. In particular, the stressors that we're facing, the challenges that we're facing primarily have to do with staffing and COVID. Staffing, we still have 4 vacancies, teacher vacancies. These are academic interventionist vacancies, but we actually had a classroom teacher vacancy, took one of our interventionists and put her in there. She was willing to stay, thank goodness, in that. That wasn't what she was hired for, and she was willing to do that for the year. So our classrooms are covered, but Lothrop is down 1 academic interventionist, and Otter Valley is down 3. And you might recall this is to be the year of recovery from COVID. Well, we're down the interventionist to help us do that. We also have I'm sorry the principals left actually, because I think it's important they hear me say this too. We have very, very few subs, very, very few subs. And our principals are subbing every day, as opposed to handling the discipline, handling the bus issues, they're in the classrooms because we don't have subs, and that's what we need to have them do. I'm very concerned about the burnout. They kept everything going so well last year, expected to come back this year in a better place, and these first couple of weeks have been very, very tough.
All staffing related?
Mostly staffing related. I'll get to some of it. When I said that we have very few subs and we have vacancies, we no longer have a candidate pool. We're lucky if we have a candidate puddle when it comes to our openings. I mean, we're not unique in this. This is across the board. We also need bus drivers. We need paraeducators. We need some custodians. The buses, Rich on a daily basis is working magic to be able to pick up all the kids with a bus driver down here or a bus driver down there. We had 3 to 5 staff newly hired this year across all positions who walked off the job the first day or the first week. It's just a really difficult time. Now, some of our neighboring districts are worse. I have a neighboring district who is down 50 total positions. We're not. But there's just nobody out there to hire right now. It's not specific to us, but it has an impact on us. Licensure generally, just a second, Mike, I'll just finish this piece on staffing. Generally, we have about 2 to 3 people a year that we get a provisional license for, and usually it's because they just need to take the praxis test, or they're doing peer review and haven't quite finished it yet, or they're just within a course or 2 of their classes. This year we have 9 people on provisional and emergency license. An emergency license basically says you have a bachelor's degree and we understand you're not licensed, but we'll let you teach for the year, with supports, obviously. So these things are significant, and I'm worried about burned out, I'm worried about recovery, and I'll go on to the other piece, but first Mike's question.
So with that, in regard to the subs, have anybody reached out to like the local colleges to see education majors?
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely. We talk to the local colleges, we advertise locally, we put it out on Facebook from schools like, does anybody have a cousin who's coming to visit you who could sub for a couple of days? We reach out to all of our staff who have college kids like me and say, can they sub between their classes? We have a close relationship with Castleton in particular, and we actually work with them to bring in nursing students to help our nurses whose workload is significantly increased under COVID. They can't be alone because they're not licensed and they're not subs, they're students, but they can help with screenings, they can help with things. So yeah, we're doing that. So let me just finish the stressors that we've got. The other stressor that and I'm not asking the board for anything, so you can relax and just listen. But I feel like you should know what the state of the state is. COVID is not over. It is really not, and we're feeling that. So this weekend we had 2 cases at Otter Valley. Today we had at least 1 case at Lothrop. That affected 60. That meant that over the weekend, Tina Spott, the school nurse, and Jim Avery, the principal, were in the building calling 62 close contacts There is not help from the State Department on this. We are doing the contact tracing, we are doing the phone calling. There were 25 people who needed to be contacted today at Lothrop. I get to stay in the background right now and write letters, but I was doing that on the weekend and constantly in communication with those who are handling it. It's the first cases to hit us in school open, but it also meant that out of those 62 close contacts, I believe that half of them ended up being students who had to quarantine. That's affecting their learning. We cannot handle hybrid learning zooming into the classroom this year for a multitude of reasons. One is it's very, very difficult to teach a class of kids sitting in front of you while you're also teaching kids on the computer. We made it work last year, but we really need to target those kids who are sitting in front of us this year. We can't be doing the double duty. And secondly, our computers, like the rest of the world, we ordered more computers to increase our supply. They're still 45 days out. That's if we're lucky. And that's, again, not unique to us. We did not wait to order. The whole world is tracking down computers. So I'm not sure at Lothrop how many of the close contacts will be quarantined. Oh, well, all of them, because they're all unvaccinated. At least at the high school, half of the close contacts were vaccinated, and thank goodness 5 out of the 6 adults affected were vaccinated. So we're able to keep the school open. But at the elementary school, the kids are not vaccinated, so they're all 24, 25 are out. And that's, again, going to impact their learning. So I just wanted you to understand that, or to be aware and to not just put a positive spin on it. We're dealing with it. We're working with it. It is going to, it is causing a great deal of stress. Everybody really wanted to wrap around the kids and really make up for last 20 months of hybrid learning and virtual learning. But we're off to a rocky start, and it's not unique to RNESU, but we're off to a rocky start. Any questions?
Where do you think that's going to lead to, Jean?
So, your guess is as good as mine. We really are not getting help from the state. The new contact tracing procedures that were announced yesterday by the governor are exactly what we've been doing. There is nothing different in them, and the only ease in them is what we already knew, is if somebody is vaccinated and doesn't have symptoms, they don't have to quarantine. The governor's updated contact tracing said we don't have to tell them. I don't think that's really right. So if your child were vaccinated, which can't be, but if your child were vaccinated and a close contact, we wouldn't have to tell you they were a close contact. I'm not sure that we're going to follow that rule. I think our parents want to know.
Well, just because the symptoms can be so
subtle. Yeah, and you
I
can
would
get
want
it.
to know. I have a child who has asthma.
And you can get it
That would
vaccinated.
actually cost me to not vaccinate.
Right.
I would want to know.
Yeah. So some of our people testing positive right now were vaccinated. So that there's just no help there. If the Delta variant is followed by Mu or Lambda or whatever else is down, I mean, we're probably in this for the year. I think we're all optimistic that we could make it through a year. I'm concerned about making it through a second year. I'm just concerned about the impact on our kids with a second year. And without the staff, it's not even like I can say, can you give me some, you could say yes to me and I won't find anybody.
So if the staffing pool is now a puddle, is there, do you have any sense for why that is, or is there a light at the end of that tunnel? Or is it a puddle everywhere, or are there pools other places but puddles here?
There's a puddle everywhere. I'm president of the Regional Superintendents Association, and we talk every Tuesday, and this is a regular conversation on those Tuesday calls. In fact, I think there are multiple boards getting the same message this week. We're all saying we need to speak up. The puddle is everywhere. Is there light at the end of unemployment insurance? I don't know. That's one theory. I don't know. I don't know if there really is. I think that we also have to remember that with schools being, some people, I meant to tell you too, that we do have 23 kids who have taken the virtual academy option, which is awesome, and that's going well. That is starting out really well. Half of those kids are high school and half of those kids are elementary. But with some kids who need to be home, with some families with immunocompromised systems, I think that the working pool is down anyway. So you can go out and find us some
What are the qualifications to be a sub?
high school diploma.
And a non-school board director.
Yeah, and a non-school board, I'm sorry.
But we could volunteer, couldn't we?
You can volunteer, but we can't put you in front of a class by yourself.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
But if
Yeah,
we
volunteers
reach out
can never be left alone with kids.
Oh, so then it's useless.
parental group.
Pardon?
Like, if we reached out to parents, there's parents that could potentially be considering it, but have no idea that we're this
Yeah,
short.
principals are doing that because that's where the relationship really is. And I'll put it in the Friday letter, email also. But principals are reaching out and, occasionally somebody walks through the door and then we grab them and work the heck out of them.
Right, I mean, there could be people that are interested that just don't even realize that they could do it, or
Yeah.
that it
So
wouldn't
word
be
of
every
mouth,
day, or-
personal contacts, social media, all those non-traditional ways of reaching out.
Did you see, is it Massachusetts that?
The National Guard?
Yeah,
I did see that.
What? They enlisted, what, 200?
The governor sent out the National Guard to be bus drivers
Really?
in Massachusetts.
Oh, that's awesome. So short. Yeah, but then that's pulling them from other.
And our governor is talking
It's a
about
creative
National Guard
solution.
being
Oh, one
contact
program.
tracers.
Wow, that'd be great.
I love it.
Yeah.
That'd be a relief, wouldn't it? Just manpower.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to change the way schools are doing things now. At this point, the contact tracers are less trained than the school staff are now. It was Department of Health staff doing it, and they backed away from that, and they contracted out, and so we're telling them.
How's the response been for people that are identified as needing to quarantine? Are they complying or?
So far, we're only in the second week of school, but we got like a zillion parent requests or student requests on Monday morning, can we Zoom into class? And despite the fact that I had already said in advance, no, you can't. So that's difficult. Teachers are asked to post assignments on Google Classroom or Seesaw if you're younger. And if we do have to go virtual because a teacher has to go virtual and the whole class has an outbreak, then we're able to do that because it's everybody.
But it's only in the elementary school.
But that's pretty much only in the elementary school. And then we would give teachers a day to get ready for that. But otherwise, in any given day, you could have 2 or 3 kids out of your class on quarantine for 7 to 10 days. And it's difficult to keep up with the class. I'm worried about how that's going to play out.
It almost seems like, and I don't know enough to know, but statistically, the more that happens, the more likely kids are just going to be, if they're affected by being in close contact with you today, and him 3 weeks from now, and you 6 weeks from now, that kid's never in school because he knows people,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, one positive light, I guess, is that vaccinations for kids under 12 is coming, they say, within the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that everybody wants it.
Right.
I am considering a vaccine mandate for staff. Actually, both of our associations are supportive of it. And so we're just kind of watching what's happened, what the governor's going to come out with, and what the best way is to do that. But it would help. And even then, I'm not going to put us in a situation where you have to vaccinate or you're going to be fired, because that's hardly going to help my staffing.
Not a bit, and that
So-
sounds like that's really your biggest problem.
So
is
it'll
staffing.
be, you have to be vaccinated or tested weekly. That's the, but then I think we'll, we'll be majority vaccinated. I think we are majority vaccinated with teachers already, so I don't think it's going to, or with staff already, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. But both associations are actually very supportive of it.
So right now, are the rules the same as last year for the unvaccinated if they have to quarantine, was it 7 days and then a negative test before we can?
Yes.
Otherwise?
Yeah, they're now recommending a test at 2 days and at 7 days. I'm not sure why, but they added a test, recommending a test. And our nurses are, you know, just incredibly, I can't even begin to describe what Tina Spots sent me this weekend with the spreadsheet that she had collected where she had to identify all these, I mean, it took hours and hours and hours to pull this together.
Bill, you had a question?
Yes, on that dismal topic, I move we adjourn.
Okay.
I
Anyone
love
want to
ending
second
meetings
that?
positively.
I'll second.
Mike seconded that. All right, all those in favor?
All right.
All right, good night, everyone.